Welcome to Fractured Chaos.
You know what's funny about life? Just when you think you've got it all figured out, the universe decides to throw you a cosmic curveball. Like finding out your grandmother, yes, my sweet, church-going, cookie-baking Grandma Rose, somehow turned my girlfriend into a lesbian. I know how that sounds. Trust me, I didn't believe it either. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back 3 months ago. I was dating Sophia. Smart, gorgeous, ambitious Sophia. We'd been together for almost 2 years, and I was starting to think she might be the one. We'd met at a tech conference in San Francisco, where she was presenting research on artificial intelligence ethics, and I was there representing my company's new software platform. It was one of those chance encounters that feels scripted by fate. She spilled coffee on my laptop. I made a bad joke about liquid intelligence, and somehow that led to dinner, which led to breakfast, which led to 2 years of what I thought was perfection. We were that couple everyone envied, finishing each other's sentences, planning weekend getaways, hosting dinner parties, where we moved around each other in the kitchen like we'd choreographed it. I even had a ring hidden in my sock drawer, a vintage sapphire that had belonged to my mother. The proposal plan involved her favorite hiking trail and a surprise picnic at the summit. Classic, maybe a little cliché, but Sophia always said she appreciated the comfort of certain traditions. But there was something I noticed in her texts, random messages that made no sense. The birds sing at midnight, or remember the red door. Once, I caught a glimpse of, when the moon waxes full, the truth rises with it. I thought maybe she was writing a novel or something. Sophia had always talked about wanting to create fantasy fiction when she retired from her work in AI development. I never imagined they were actually coded messages to my grandmother. It's funny how you can live with someone, sleep beside them every night, and think you know every facet of their being, only to discover they're keeping whole constellations hidden from your view. It all started when Grandma Rose moved in with us after her hip surgery. Just for a few weeks, she said, leaning heavily on her ornate wooden cane. The one she claimed was carved from a tree struck by lightning during a new moon. I won't be any trouble. Grandma was always a bit eccentric. Not in the typical grandmother way of collecting ceramic figurines or obsessing over soap operas. No, Grandma Rose collected obscure crystals from around the world, talked about energy fields and celestial alignments, and had this way of looking at you like she knew all your secrets, even the ones you hadn't discovered yet yourself. She kept a greenhouse full of herbs I couldn't pronounce and had more wind chimes than any reasonable person should own. But she was family, you know? And besides, under all that mystical mumbo-jumbo beat the heart of the woman who'd bandaged my skinned knees and taught me to make her famous blackberry pie. The woman who'd raised my father alone after my grandfather died young, or so I thought at the time. Plus, our house had that spare room we'd been using as a home office, and it seemed like the decent thing to do. And Sophia? God, Sophia was so good with her. They'd spend hours together while I was at work. I'd come home to find them hunched over cups of strange-smelling tea, laughing like old friends sharing inside jokes. Sometimes they'd be in the greenhouse, Sophia learning the names and properties of each mysterious plant. Or I'd catch them sitting in silence, eyes closed, hands loosely clasped, breathing in perfect synchronicity. We're just meditating, Sophia explained when I asked. It's good for Grandma's healing, and honestly, it helps me unwind from work too. I thought it was sweet, this bond between them. Sophia had lost her own grandmother years ago, and had always spoken about that relationship with a special kind of reverence. I was glad she had that connection with Grandma Rose, especially since my relationship with the old woman had always been somewhat distant, loving but complicated by my skepticism of her more unconventional beliefs. Your grandmother is remarkable, Sophia told me one night as we got ready for bed. Her eyes had a strange gleam to them, like she'd glimpsed something magnificent, but couldn't quite find the words to describe it. She sees things others don't. Like ghosts, I joked, pulling on my sleep shirt. Sophia didn't laugh. Like truth, she said simply, and turned out the light. Then I found the journal. It was a Sunday morning, and I was changing the sheets, a chore Sophia usually handled, but had forgotten in her rush to take Grandma to some farmer's market that supposedly had energetically superior honey. The corner of a leather-bound book peeked out from under Sophia's side of the mattress when I lifted it to tuck in the fitted sheet. I shouldn't have opened it. I knew that even as my fingers traced the worn cover, embossed with symbols I didn't recognize. Privacy is sacred in relationships. That's what all the experts say, right? But something pulled at me, some instinct I couldn't name, and I found myself sitting on the bare mattress, the journal open in my trembling hands. Inside were pages and pages of handwritten notes in what looked like my grandmother's elegant, old-fashioned script. Strange symbols I'd seen around her neck or painted on small stones in her room. Diagrams of what appeared to be star charts or perhaps energy flows. Lists of herbs I couldn't pronounce. Mugwort, damiana, blue vervain, with specific measurements and moon phases noted beside them. For clarity of vision, one page read. For courage to face truth, said another. One page had Sophia's name circled 7 times with the words liberation and true self written around it in a spiral pattern. And in the corner, in red ink, the chrysalis opens on the full moon. My heart hammered against my ribs as I flipped through more pages. There were passages that seemed like personal reflections. Sophia's voice now, not my grandmother's. I dreamed of birds again last night. They were trapped in human forms, wearing suits and dresses, sitting at desks and in cars, but I could see their true selves straining against skin that didn't fit. I was one of them. When I looked at my hands, I could see feathers trying to push through my fingertips. I woke up crying, but they weren't tears of sadness. And later, Rose says the dreams are messages, not metaphors. That sometimes our subconscious speaks in the only language it knows will get through to us. She says I've been walking a path laid out for me by others for so long that I've forgotten how to hear my own footsteps. I'm not saying I immediately jumped to, my grandmother is performing some kind of ritual on my girlfriend. I'm a rational guy. I work in software development, for crying out loud. I build systems based on logic and predictable outcomes. This was probably just some kind of, what? Therapy journaling? Creative writing exercise? Shared interest in New Age philosophy. But the last entry, dated just 3 days prior, made my blood run cold. The ritual is set for the full moon. 7 crystals in the sacred pattern. The herbal infusion prepared over 3 nights. The salt circle to protect the space. Rose says once it's done, there's no going back, but that the path forward is the one I was always meant to walk. I'm terrified, and yet I've never been more certain of anything. I closed the journal, my hands shaking so badly I could barely tuck it back into its hiding place. My mind raced with wild interpretations. Was my grandmother in some kind of cult? Was she inducting Sophia? Were they planning something dangerous? The logical part of my brain tried to assert itself. Surely there was a reasonable explanation. Maybe they'd bonded over interest in pagan history or Wiccan practices as an academic exercise. Maybe it was research for that novel I thought Sophia might be writing. But then I remembered the strange, distant look in Sophia's eyes lately. The way she sometimes seemed to be looking through me rather than at me. How she'd taken to going for long walks alone, returning with twigs in her hair, and a peaceful expression I'd never seen before. When I confronted Sophia about it that evening, showing her the journal I'd found, she just smiled this strange, distant smile and said, "Charles, don't you ever feel like you're living someone else's life?" And then she left to go grocery shopping with Grandma, leaving me standing there with the journal in my hand, feeling like I was suddenly in a movie I didn't audition for. So, I did what any rational person would do. I installed a small recording device in our living room. Yeah, not my proudest moment, and probably illegal in several states. But something wasn't adding up. And the notes in that journal had me genuinely worried about Sophia's mental state, or maybe Grandma's influence on her. I placed the device behind a stack of books on the shelf where they often sat talking, one of those tiny voice-activated recorders that could capture hours of conversation. Then I made sure I had late meetings at work the next 2 evenings, giving them plenty of time alone together. The recordings. They weren't what I expected at all. No strange chanting or cult-like ceremonies. No talk of spells or magic or mind control. Instead, I heard them talking. Really talking. About life, about happiness, about what it means to be true to yourself. I spent 47 years living the life everyone expected of me, I heard Grandma say, her voice stronger and clearer than the frail tone she often used around me. I was a good wife to Joseph, a good mother to your father. I don't regret my children. They were the greatest gifts of my life. But there was always a piece of me missing, a hollow space that ached especially in the quiet moments. Tell me about Eleanor again, Sophia asked softly. My ears perked up at the unfamiliar name. Grandma was telling Sophia stories about her youth, about a woman named Eleanor she'd loved deeply in the 1960s, before marrying my grandfather, because that's what was expected. I had no idea my grandmother had this whole other life, this whole other love. Eleanor Hudson, Grandma said, her voice taking on a warmth I rarely heard. She taught mathematics at the women's college where I studied botany. She had these eyes, green like spring leaves, and hands that were always stained with chalk dust. The first time I saw her solving equations on the blackboard, it was like watching someone dance. I'd never seen such joy in numbers before. What happened? Sophia asked. We had 3 years together, hidden of course, meeting in her small apartment off campus, telling everyone we were just good friends. In those days, women could live in Boston marriages without too much suspicion if they were discreet. We talked about finding a small town somewhere far away, where no one knew us, where we might live as roommates for the rest of our lives. Why didn't you? Grandma sighed, a sound so heavy with decades-old regret that I felt like an intruder hearing it. My father fell ill. I went home to care for him, and while I was there, I reconnected with Joseph, your grandfather. He was kind and steady, and he understood me in ways most men didn't. When he proposed, I said yes because it was the path of least resistance. Because I wanted children, because Eleanor and I had fought before I left. She wanted me to let my brother care for father, to choose our love over family obligation. Did you ever see her again? Sophia's voice was barely above a whisper. Yes, Grandma replied. Over the years, she never married. She's still alive, you know. Lives about 2 hours from here now, in that little artist community near the coast. We exchange letters, Christmas cards, the occasional phone call. Does she know about this, what you're helping me with? Eleanor has always understood the importance of living authentically. Whatever the cost, she would approve. One conversation haunts me still. Sophia asking, but how did you know that what you felt for Eleanor was real? Not just confusion or rebellion. And Grandma replying, when you know, you know. The question is, are you brave enough to admit it to yourself? It felt like they were speaking in code, but maybe the code was just truth. There were hours more, discussions of energy and intuition, yes, but not in the hocus-pocus way I'd feared. Rather, they talked about the wisdom of listening to one's inner voice, of recognizing when you're living against your own nature. Grandma spoke of her decades-long marriage to my grandfather with genuine affection and respect, but also with the clear-eyed recognition that it had been a compromise, a diversion from her heart's true path. And Sophia spoke of feeling like she'd been wearing a mask for so long she'd forgotten what her real face looked like. Of dating men because it was expected and easier. Of pushing away thoughts and feelings that didn't fit the life she thought she was supposed to want. There's a difference, my grandmother said gently, between loving someone and trying to love them the way they want to be loved. Between building a life with someone and forcing yourself into a life that was never meant for you. I turned off the recorder then, my hands shaking. I felt sick, not with anger, but with the dawning realization that I might be losing Sophia, not to some strange cult or my grandmother's influence, but to a truth that had been there all along, one I had been too blind to see. I confronted Grandma the next day, caught her alone in the greenhouse, carefully tending to her herbs, her gnarled fingers moving with surprising dexterity among the plants. I know about Eleanor, I said without preamble. About the journal, about the conversations with Sophia. Grandma didn't startle or try to deny anything. She simply looked up at me, those knowing eyes seeing right through to all my fears and insecurities. "I wondered when you'd figure it out," she said calmly, setting aside her gardening shears. "You've always been observant, Charles, even as a little boy. But sometimes we see only what we expect to see." "What exactly are you doing with Sophia?" I demanded, trying to keep my voice level, despite the storm of emotions raging inside me. "These rituals, these talks about true selves and liberation. It sounds like you're brainwashing her." Grandma laughed, actually laughed, which only fueled my anger. "Oh, my darling boy," she said, reaching for my hand. I almost pulled away, but something in her expression stopped me. "No one turns anyone into anything they weren't already meant to be. The only magic in this world is truth, and the courage to face it. So you're not casting spells on her or something?" Even as I said it, I felt ridiculous. The rituals, the herbs, the crystals, they're tools, Charles. Focus points, like training wheels on a bicycle. They help quiet the noise of the world so we can hear our own heart speaking. Nothing more, nothing less. "And what is Sophia's heart saying?" I asked, my voice cracking despite my best efforts. Grandma Rose took my hand and said something I'll never forget. "That's for her to tell you, not me. But Charles, darling, love isn't ownership. Sometimes the greatest act of love is letting someone go." I pulled my hand away then, anger surging back. "So you've known all along that she was going to leave me? That's why you moved in here, isn't it? Not because of your hip at all. You came to take her away." "I came because my hip was broken," Grandma said firmly. "I stayed because I recognized in Sophia the same struggle I lived with for 50 years. The difference is, she has the chance to resolve it while she's still young enough to build the life she truly wants." "What about the life we were building?" I shouted, past caring who might hear. "Didn't that matter at all?" "Of course it mattered," Grandma said softly. "It matters enough that Sophia deserves to be sure, to be whole in herself before making a lifetime commitment. And you, my dear grandson, deserve someone who loves you completely, without reservation or compromise." I stormed out then, unable to hear more, convinced that my grandmother, with her talks of authenticity and her mysterious past, had somehow corrupted what Sophia and I had built, had turned her away from me with tales of alternate paths and hidden truths. That night, I found a strange symbol drawn in salt on our bedroom floor, and Sophia wasn't in bed next to me. It was just after midnight, and the house had that peculiar stillness that seems to amplify every small sound. The tick of the hall clock, the hum of the refrigerator, the rustle of branches against windows. I followed the sound of voices to the backyard, where Grandma and Sophia sat under the full moon, drinking tea and laughing. Just laughing. Like they shared the world's best secret. They sat in the center of a circle of small white candles, 7 crystals arranged in a pattern around them. No chanting, no dancing, no sacrificed animals or bubbling cauldrons. Just 2 women, 3 generations apart, finding common ground under the vast indifference of the stars. I didn't interrupt them. Something held me back, perhaps the genuine joy on Sophia's face, a lightness I realized had been absent for months, possibly longer. Or maybe it was the way they sat together, comfortable in both conversation and silence, like 2 people who truly saw each other. I went back to bed, but couldn't sleep. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering when exactly I'd lost Sophia, or if I'd ever really had her at all. The next morning, Sophia told me we needed to talk. She sat across from me at our kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a mug of coffee, her eyes clearer and more focused than I'd seen them in months. "I love you, Charles," she began, and something in her tone made my stomach drop. "I've always loved you, and part of me always will. But not in the way you deserve to be loved. Not in the way that would make either of us truly happy in the long run." She wasn't in love with me anymore. Hadn't been for months. She'd been questioning her sexuality for years, but had buried it so deep she couldn't even acknowledge it to herself. She dated men because it was expected, because it was easier. because she'd grown up in a conservative family where there was only one acceptable path. "Your grandmother didn't put these feelings in me," she said firmly, correctly reading the accusation in my eyes. "They've always been there. But until Grandma Rose, with her stories of Eleanor and roads not taken, I didn't have the words for them, or the courage to speak them aloud." "So you're, what? A lesbian? After 2 years together, you just suddenly realized you don't like men?" I knew I sounded petulant, but I couldn't help it. Everything was unraveling, and I was desperately trying to find the loose thread that had started it all, something to blame beyond the simple, devastating truth that Sophia wasn't who I thought she was. Or rather, she was more than who I'd allowed her to be. "It's not sudden, and it's not about you, Charles," she said. "It's about me finally being honest, with myself first, and now with you." I didn't take it well. I blamed Grandma. Called her a manipulative old witch. Actual witch. Those symbols, the herbs, the full moon ritual. I was convinced she'd cast some kind of spell. That the tea they shared was some kind of potion. That the crystals had hypnotized Sophia. That the salt circles and candles had opened some kind of portal that had changed her. I even snuck into her room, found her collection of crystals and old books, and, I'm not proud of this, I threw them into the garden pond. All I accomplished was killing Mrs. Fincher's prize koi fish next door when whatever was in those books leached into the water. The HOA still sends me hate mail, and Mrs. Fincher crosses herself whenever she sees me at the mailbox. Sophia moved out the following weekend, taking only her personal belongings and leaving behind all the furniture we'd chosen together, all the kitchen gadgets she'd been so excited about, all the framed photos of our trips and holidays. It felt like she was shedding a skin, leaving behind the shell of a life that no longer fit. Grandma stayed though. She'd been prepared to go with Sophia, I think. But when I returned from work to find Sophia's closet empty and her keys on the counter, I found Grandma in the kitchen making dinner as if nothing had changed. "You should hate me," I told her bitterly. "I could never hate you," she replied simply. "You're hurting, and people in pain often lash out at whatever target seems most convenient. I'm old enough to have thick skin." "Why are you still here?" I demanded. She looked at me with those knowing eyes. "Because you need me more than Sophia does now." I wanted to argue, to tell her to leave, to shout that I never wanted to see her esoteric crystals or mysterious herbs again. But something stopped me. Perhaps the realization that she was right. Or maybe just the bone-deep exhaustion of grief. We ate in silence that night, and the night after. Slowly, day by day, I stopped blaming her. Started asking questions instead. About her life, about Eleanor, about the choices she'd made, and the roads not taken. Then, something strange happened. I found another journal, this one hidden in the attic, when I was putting away holiday decorations I couldn't bear to look at anymore. It was my grandfather's. A simple leather notebook, pragmatic and unadorned, much like the man I remembered. Solid, dependable, kind but reserved. And in it, he wrote about knowing about Eleanor all along, about how he and Grandma had an understanding. They loved each other, but differently than the storybook said. They created a life together because they both wanted family, children, stability. But they had an arrangement. "Rose came to me honestly before we married," he wrote in his precise handwriting. "She told me about Eleanor, about her nature, about the love they shared. Some men might have walked away, but I saw in Rose a kindred spirit, someone who understood that love takes many forms, not all of them passionate. What we built together was a partnership based on mutual respect, shared goals, and genuine affection. I have my own secrets, my own road not taken. We give each other space to honor those parts of ourselves while building something sustainable together." He had his secrets too. The journal spoke of a man named Thomas, a fellow veteran he'd served with in Korea. They wrote letters for years, met occasionally for fishing trips that were more than they seemed. Not affairs exactly. Both men honored their marriages, but connections that acknowledged parts of themselves their conventional lives couldn't accommodate. There was a photo tucked in the journal. Grandma, young and beautiful in a flowing dress, standing between my grandfather and this woman who must have been Eleanor. They were all at some kind of lakeside gathering, standing close together, comfortable in each other's space. They were all smiling, really smiling. The kind of smile that reaches your eyes because you're exactly where you're supposed to be, with exactly who you're supposed to be with. I couldn't reconcile this with the grandfather I remembered. Steady, traditional, a man of few words who went to church every Sunday and taught me to fish and change oil in the car. But maybe that was the point. We all contain multitudes. We all wear masks, some so comfortable we forget we're wearing them at all. I realized then that what I thought was Grandma turning Sophia away from me was actually Grandma recognizing something in Sophia that I had been too blind or too scared to see. She wasn't performing rituals to brainwash my girlfriend. She was simply listening, sharing her story, creating a safe space for Sophia to question and discover. The symbols, the crystals, the full moon meetings, they weren't magic spells, but rather tangible anchors for the much harder, much more genuine magic of self-discovery. Props in a play where Sophia was finally learning her true role rather than reciting lines written for her by others. The rituals help, Grandma explained when I finally asked her about them directly. They create sacred space, psychological distance from everyday concerns. They tell the subconscious mind, this is important, pay attention. But the power comes from within, not from the tools themselves. So you're not really a witch? I asked, only half joking. She smiled mysteriously. Depends on your definition, I suppose. I've always found power in intention, in connection to natural cycles, in the quiet wisdom that comes when you silence the noise of expectation. Is that witchcraft? Or just paying better attention than most? We talked for hours that night. About Sophia, about Eleanor, about my grandfather and Thomas, about roads taken and not taken, about how sometimes the bravest thing we can do is acknowledge when we've been walking the wrong path, even when we've invested years in the journey. Did you ever regret it? I asked her, marrying Grandpa instead of staying with Eleanor? She considered this carefully. Regret is a complicated emotion, she finally said. I regret that I lived in a time when I couldn't have both Eleanor and children, both authentic love and societal acceptance. But I don't regret your father, or you, or the life I built with Joseph. He was a good man who understood me better than most. We had a different kind of love, but it was love nonetheless. And Eleanor, did she regret? She made her choices too. She had her career, her freedom, her circle of like-minded friends. We each had what the other sacrificed in some ways. She paused, looking into the distance as if seeing across decades. But yes, there were regrets. Moments of what if that never quite fade. So I did something crazy. I invited Sophia and Grandma to dinner, and I invited someone else too. Eleanor. Yes, that Eleanor. Turns out she never married, lives just 2 hours away, and she and Grandma have remained friends all these years. I tracked her down through the college where she'd taught, now long retired, but still living in the same small house she'd owned for decades. When I called and introduced myself as Rose's grandson, there was a long pause before she said, "Well, isn't that an unexpected delight?" She arrived precisely on time, a tall, elegant woman with silver hair in a neat bun, and those green eyes Grandma had described, still bright and sharp despite her advanced age. She brought a bottle of good wine and a quiet dignity that filled the room. Grandma nearly fell out of her chair when Eleanor walked in. They're both in their 80s now, but the way they looked at each other. Some flames never go out. They didn't fall into each other's arms or share passionate kisses like a movie reunion. Instead, Eleanor simply took Grandma's hands in hers and said, "Hello, Rose. It's been too long." And Grandma, my practical, mystical, complex grandmother, simply nodded and replied, "Far too long, Ellie." At dinner, I returned the journals to both of them, my grandfather's to Grandma and hers to Sophia, who had arrived looking nervous but determined. I apologized. For the anger, for the accusations, for destroying Grandma's books and crystals. I understand now, I told them. Not completely maybe, but I'm trying. And then, I did something even crazier. I asked Sophia if the woman she'd been texting, the one who kept showing up in her recent social media photos, was someone special to her. Her face when I asked that. Part terror, part relief. Her name is Jade. They met at a pottery class Grandma had suggested Sophia take. I wasn't looking for anything, Sophia explained cautiously. I wasn't cheating on you, Charles. I wouldn't do that. I know, I said, and was surprised to find I meant it. But sometimes connections find us when we're not looking. Jade is everything I'm not. Artistic, intuitive, free-spirited. She has wild curly hair and paint-stained fingers and laughs with her whole body. Looking at them together across the table, I could see the rightness of it, the way they fit. It hurt, but in the clarifying way that cleaning a wound hurts, painful but necessary for healing. So, now, 3 months later, here we are. Grandma and Eleanor are taking a friendship trip to the coast. At 83 and 85 respectively, they're not exactly running away together, but they're carving out space to reconnect, to see what might still be possible in the final chapters of their lives. Sophia and Jade are disgustingly happy and just signed a lease together. Jade teaches art at the community college and makes these strange, beautiful sculptures that somehow capture emotions in abstract forms. They have a cat named Merlin and go hiking on weekends and host full moon gatherings in their small backyard. Not witch ceremonies, just friends sitting around a fire pit, sharing stories and dreams and bottles of good wine. And me? I'm still processing, still healing, still waking up sometimes reaching for someone who isn't there, but also realizing that maybe, just maybe, my grandmother didn't turn my girlfriend into a lesbian. She just helped her find her way to happiness. And in her weird, mystical Grandma Rose way, she's helping me find mine too. I've started therapy, actual professional therapy, not crystal and herb therapy, though my therapist did suggest meditation might help with my anxiety, which made me laugh until I cried the first time. I've reconnected with old friends I'd let drift away during my relationship with Sophia. I've even gone on a couple of dates. Nothing serious, just dipping my toes back in the water. Last week, I found a small package on my doorstep. Inside was one of Grandma's crystals, the one she always said helps you find your true path, and a note that simply read, "The birds don't just sing at midnight, Charles. Listen for them at dawn." I have no idea what that means, but I'm keeping my ears open. Oh, and that ring in my sock drawer. I pawned it and bought a ticket to New Zealand. Always wanted to go there, never had the courage. Figured it's time to write my own story now. After all, if there's one thing I've learned from this whole mess, it's that life's too short to live someone else's version of it. I leave next month. 3 weeks of hiking the South Island, sleeping under stars I've never seen before, meeting people with no preconceived notions of who I am or who I should be. Grandma's loaned me her travel journal, a new one, not the one with all the rituals and herb lists, to record my thoughts and experiences. The best magic, she told me, is the everyday kind. The sunrise over mountains you've never seen before. The taste of unfamiliar food on your tongue. The sound of your own laughter when you're not trying to be anyone but yourself. Eleanor, who it turns out traveled extensively during her teaching career, has marked maps with hidden spots I should visit, small coves and local cafes, and hiking trails not found in guidebooks. Sophia and Jade gave me a waterproof camera and extracted promises of photos and stories when I return. And between you and me, I'm pretty sure Grandma really is a witch, but not the kind I thought. The kind that sees the truth and isn't afraid to speak it. The kind that knows sometimes the greatest magic of all is simply giving someone permission to be who they really are. So, if your grandmother ever moves in with you and starts having secret conversations with your significant other, maybe don't install recording devices. Maybe just listen. Really listen. You never know what truths you might discover about them, about yourself, about the strange and wonderful magic of being exactly who you're meant to be. Because in the end, that's what this journey has taught me. We're all just trying to find our authentic selves in a world that constantly tries to shape us into something more convenient, more conventional, more comprehensible to others. And sometimes the greatest act of love, whether for ourselves or for someone else, is to recognize when a chrysalis has served its purpose, when it's time to emerge, spread new wings, and fly.